anyway, well, let's bring to mind a really good motivation then for, engaging in this discussion. Obviously, we're not doing it for any financial benefit, or certainly I'm not thinking about reputation. Well, maybe there's a little bit there, hoping I don't get a bad reputation out of it. But anyway, essentially getting beyond ourselves and trying to motivate for the wider good of people, and even wider than that, other sentient beings, animals, insects, those in the different realms that we know about, and so on. And not just to achieve some sort of mundane happiness, but to actually bring an end to our samsara, and through generating and attaining enlightenment, being able to bring an end to others' samsara as well. So anyway, this, as I say, this being the first of 4, I thought just to focus on the mind, because that's the key point in our studies, and we hear about it in all of our teachings, and there's lots and lots of detail that we can go into about the mind. But essentially, even though we might have been practicing for a while, we still find that we seek happiness outside, that we look for, we might not call it happiness, but say some pleasure, and there's nothing wrong with that, in external objects. In the food is a very hard one, because, why wouldn't you want to have delicious food? And we do want to enjoy warmth or cool, depending on where we are, and acquired environment, all these sort of things we've been talking about. So deep down, we have a feeling that somehow, if we work it right, that there will be some sort of happy ever after. We'll just kind of, if we can manage it just right, it'll, life will be kind of consistently pleasant and enjoyable. And but what we do find is that when we look, we check into our experiences, that we often have put a lot of energy into the things that we do, and have they actually brought that pleasure? Yes, maybe for a while. Has it lasted? That's a question. Have we been able to increase it? Make it larger. And has it actually been pleasurable at all? And then underlying that, afterwards, we tend to rush on, and we don't check and see, kind of look back and see, well, this initial aim that we had, has it actually brought the result? And even if it has brought some sort of mundane result, is there still an underlying dissatisfaction, a kind of an urge to either do it again or do something different? So we find by repeated looking at that actually it doesn't matter how much we have, but it doesn't bring lasting satisfaction. And in fact, really the pleasure and the happiness that we get from it is not so much dependent upon the external object, but on our own mind, our own internal attitude. And it can be that that's quite unrelated to the amount of material that we have. We might have had what some people would say a deprived childhood, not very much in the way of possessions or toys or friends even, or that sort of thing, but we might have been quite content with that, and in that way have been as happy as somebody who has a lot more. We all know of the song, I think it was the Rolling Stones first, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." So it's Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that actually it's even worse for people who have a lot of wealth, because they can try a lot of things that we can't try. And as they try more and more things, they tend to get more and more frustrated. If alcohol doesn't work, well, let's get into drugs, gets into stronger drugs, done all the travel, can go everywhere, the best hotel, the best service and so on. And still there is that nagging dissatisfaction there. So anyway, that brings us back to, so what actually is the thing that can bring us satisfaction, or it's the mind itself. So seeking outside, we fail, we're never satisfied. Seeking inside, we can succeed. And inside means the mind, and that means knowing the mind, getting to know how, what makes it tick, what is it all predetermined, for instance? Can we influence it? That sort of thing. And His Holiness says there's two basic reasons for studying the mind or knowing the mind. There's a connection between mind and karma. And so I thought we'd go into that maybe in one of the other talks. And then the second is this crucial role in our experience of happiness and suffering. So I think, as you said, Lou, then in answer to Carolyn's question there about, well, okay, if the circumstances, the environment around you, the political environment and so on is quite disturbed and maybe disharmonious or agitating and so on, so we can use the mind. We can either get entirely enrolled in it, and particularly the media kind of seems to help us with this, get enrolled with it, and we find then our mind gets pulled around and we get really quite upset. Or we can decide that, okay, this is somebody else's opinion. It comes out of ignorance. It's kind of in a way is their problem, and we don't have to buy into it. And in so doing, we kind of lessen the immediate discord in our own mind, the upset. So therefore, mind is very important in Buddhism. You could say really Buddhism is the psychology of mind, or the study of mind. And in that way, it's more of a psychology rather than a religion. Although I think the word religio means basically to sort of connect with yourself, basically, to sort of bring back, I haven't looked up the definition for a while, but it tends to be less faith-based, as we know. So we do have, the faith is an aspect of Buddhism, but a lot of it is psychology. So, and essentially we are body and mind. So we have the form aspect, which obviously, which is in various different ways. I mean, the main thing about our body, we have bones and flesh and so on, and we have our five senses. So we hear sounds and we taste things and so on. And then the other part is mind, really. And in Buddhism, there's really no third part. We do think about the I, but essentially Buddhism says we are body and mind, and we're kind of labeled on that, might say. So then the mind is the consciousness or the awareness. We use different terms for that. And the form aspect and the consciousness aspect are different phenomena. They're not the same phenomena. Mind can't become body, body can't become mind. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So then the mind itself, so what is it? It basically has these two functions, or these two aspects. There's an aspect of clarity, and there's also a knowing aspect. So the clarity aspect is like, for instance, like space. It's in the sense of being non-material, non-obstructive. It doesn't have color, it doesn't have form. But whereas space can't know objects, it can let objects arise within it, just like the mind can let, objects can arise in the mind. The space can't know objects. And so this is the other characteristic of mind, this knowing aspect. So that's the ability to cognize or engage in objects, and it's kind of an active, it's an active, dynamic sort of process. Obviously, the body and mind have a relationship, but as I said, mind is not body, body is not mind, and one can't become the other. And this is, Buddhism is really definite and adamant about that. For instance, one can influence the other. For instance, it's always easier to use a negative example. For instance, if anger is in the mind, then that can come out in our complexion, high blood pressure, face gets kind of contorted and so on. But obviously the angry or the anger doesn't become the angry face, doesn't become the high blood pressure. It can influence and, in a sense, create that, but it can't become that. To do with karma, you might say, well, then because of the anger, then the karmic imprints it can manifest in a more direct way, perhaps in the future, in the sense of an ugly disposition and being born in a place of much discord and harmony, for instance. But nevertheless, one can't become the other. So in that way, them being different substances, there's different substantial causes. And what I mean by substances is obviously with form, there's a substance, there's the material that transforms, just like, for instance, a seed transforms into a sprout, transforms into a flower or a tree, like that. The very substance of the seed metamorphoses or changes along with the appropriate conditions of heat and moisture and fertilizer and so on into the actual substance. But for instance, the sunshine doesn't transform into the seed. It helps the seed transform to that. So in that way, the seed is the substantial cause of the tree, let's say. In the same way with the mind, it has to have a concordant substantial cause. And that can only be another moment of consciousness, a previous moment of consciousness. So in this way, this present mind or continuum of mind that's coming up has to have a previous continuum of consciousness or substantial cause of consciousness. It cannot be, form cannot be its substantial cause, just as mind can't be the substantial cause of a flower, for instance. If mind was form, then at the time of death, when the body dies, there would be no continuity of mind, no continuity of I. So, you know, the idea of karma is very central to Buddhism, and it's important in the sense that it explains how things arise. You know, how the three of us, for instance, have our particular circumstances now. So if as I say, the mind had form or a form aspect, that would be left behind at death, and there would be this break between the causes that we create this lifetime and the results that we experience in the future lifetime, and like that. So Lord Buddha essentially summed up his teachings, and relating to this said, do not commit any non-virtuous actions, enjoy perfect virtuous actions, subdue the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So essentially, he's encouraging us, just as he did himself, to become our own doctor, to look inside and become our own therapist in a way. So, any questions or discussion?
So just with terminology, so mind and consciousness mean the same thing, don't they?
Essentially, they do. They both have their own definition, but essentially they're synonyms. Mind, awareness, consciousness, and then you have, we have different aspects of the mind, you know, ideas, experiences, feelings, discrimination, intention, all of these sorts of things. But in general, yes.
It just seems that there's sometimes a specific use where they say mind versus consciousness, sort of, yeah.
Well, we can break again. The whole study, the mind, in the Geshe Studies program, you know, there's mind and mental factors, and
yes.
mind and cognition, and so it's very interesting trying to look at it in different ways. And it's not, there is not just one way of looking at it. But say, for instance, with consciousness, we have our 5 sense consciousnesses plus our mental consciousness. That's one way of looking. It's essentially consciousness has to have an object. So we have to be conscious of something. And if there is no external object or no particular object, then generally the mind starts to focus on itself. And that's part of what happens in meditation. By relaxing and letting the mind settle, then we become more aware of these internal thoughts and ideas and so on. And if that settles more from that, then we start to see the spacious clarity of the mind. The kind of almost, you might say, the sort of the screen behind the movie, you know, we kind of switch the movie off as much as we can, and then we get to see actually what's behind it. So in that way, I guess, the object and the subject, our mind, are mutually independent, just like a mother and child are dependent on each other. So the mother only becomes a mother because of having a child, and the child
Mm,
is obviously, you know, a son or daughter because of having a parent.
mm, mm. Yes, yes, it's amazing, I think, Buddhism, just that whole psychology and science of the mind, and yes, it's very. I'm currently finishing a series on the four immeasurable attitudes at my center, and trying to get people to, in simple terms, beginners, like the people who've never been to Buddhism thing before, trying to get them to understand that, you know, compassion and loving kindness are kind of held in the mind, and the difference between mind and body and, you know, brain particularly. It's sort of,
Yes,
yes,
yeah,
it's an interesting one.
well,
Yes.
that's right, and still is very much an idea that that the brain is the mind, or the brain is the you know, is a prime mover, and we sort of, our consciousness comes out of these chemical functions of the brain. I mean, clearly, again, there is a relationship. I mean, our mind, it's
Yes.
almost like the
Yeah.
brain is an organ of the mind, you might say, an essential organ of the mind for this particular body. When we
Yes.
talk about the formless realms, they don't have a gross body, so it's
Yeah,
really
that's right.
it's
Mm.
really consciousness that's there. So so they don't have a brain. So what
Yes.
are they really? Are they really ignorant? Are they really stupid? You know, can they not think about anything?
Mm,
You
mm.
know, apparently not. It's apparently meant to be a really good rebirth. Well, really good in some ways, very
Somewhat.
pleasurable rebirth, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yes, there is this dependence, but it's
Mm,
from science. Yes, we tend to think that mind is the brain, and we tend to
mm.
talk about that much more than consciousness, and partly perhaps because it's traditionally been difficult for science to experiment
Well,
with the
that's
mind.
right.
Science is all about being able to reproduce your results, but the mind
Yeah.
seems kind of so slippery and subtle, and
Yes.
um,
Yes.
it's
Yes. I
very
was trying to
difficult.
explain to them that Buddhist science of the mind is sort of like first person reporting about, you know, so we have a picture of the Dalai Lama in the Gompa, and I say, well, you know, the Dalai Lama, you know, because they all know they've seen the Dalai Lama. Well, you know, the Dalai Lama follows practices that he says is sort of training his mind. And he says to us, well, I've tried these practices and they've worked for me. Therefore, you know, try them for you, see if that works. So that's sort of first person reporting. But then neuroscience has been just marvelous, and particularly when they've done so much work on, you know, like Matter Ricard has been the the subject, and I have this lovely photo of Matar Ricard with all those sort of electrode things on his head, and there he is in full robe, sort of meditating on his cushion, and there. So that's been helpful, you know, to try and get people to understand that when you change the object of your meditation, it has different sort of things happen in your brain that, you know, that doesn't come from the brain. It comes from this, you know, mind influencing the brain, but they're, you know, they're like that, but it's still.
Yep.
So I think neuroscience has been very kind to us, as the Dalai Lama says, you know, neuroscience is catching up to Buddhist science, you know.
That's right, and that's been a wonderful sort of project of His Holiness. Really, I think again a kind of in a way of helping mankind with the Dharma in a less formal sense. And you know, he's always very positive because you know, Western science does have something to contribute to towards Buddhism, and it sort of helps bridge the gap from 2,500 years ago when Lord Buddha was talking about it, to basically a group of men in that society, you know, a society with many castes and things like that. And so to, in a sense, bring it up to date and show how relevant it is to us. And I think that's really important. And let's face it, we have a scientific upbringing as well too. And I remember from physics, you know, as a child, I mean, being, you know, hearing about how atoms and, you know, molecules, and they're basically, you know, mostly space, you know, you can't, even if they were as big as a football, you couldn't see the, you know, the electrons and the nucleons and protons and all these sort of things. It would just be this whirling mass of energy, which seems, you know, still seems very insubstantial, you know. So how does solidity come about? You know, how are all these things? So for me, I still find that very helpful when we get into thinking about emptiness, and trying to find an essence in anything. You know, what is actually there? There's an appearance of something, but does the reality actually concur with the appearance? You know, and if it doesn't, then what is the reality? You know, and how does that reality influence us and function, for instance? And it's a wonderful thing, but it all goes back to to the beginning, to the mind. And so the more that we can get in kind of a clear idea of, well, what the mind is and its various facets, and I think that helps us with these other questions, as you say, the four immeasurables, for instance.
Yes. No, it's sort of like sometimes I sort of like the, you know, sometimes I get it and other times it just disappears. Sort of, you know, it's just, I think
Well, even the whole thing about immeasurable, I mean, you know, that's some pretty wild stuff that you're dealing with here, you know. Immeasurable sentient beings, you know. I mean, can we even conceive, you know, of, I don't know about you, but even all the human beings on this earth, can I conceive of 8 billion or however many there are humans on the earth, let alone, I read somewhere a while ago how many krill there were in the world, and that they were the most populous, well, certainly fish, you know, if we call them fish. And then I was thinking about perfect human rebirth, and I did the numbers, and of course it's estimates on how many krill there are, and there's 50,000 krill to every one of us. So I was thinking about precious human rebirth at the time, and I was thinking, well, even if, and 50,000 is the population basically where I live here, right? You know, so if there was only me and the rest of the humans here were krill, you know, that's pretty amazing, pretty fortunate, you know, just to be a human being, you know, let alone talk about precious human being. So I don't know, I mean, trying to get our head around these immeasurable, innumerable, they tend not to use the word infinite, but it's as if sentient beings and so on were infinite. and then to actually love them all, you know, gosh, that's pretty hard even in our neighborhood, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Sort of, yeah. I start with equanimity because I didn't used to, but that sort of like, you know, helps to sort of try and connect to people about, you know, the kind of, you know, our habit of saying, well, like that, don't care, and getting people to try and, you know, reflect and, you know, sort of, you know, my own little experiment in my backyard. I weed back onto a bush reserve, and you know, my husband's a bush regenerator and all of that, and you know, there's sort of that whole thing of what are native birds and non-native birds, and just using the you know, a particular invasive species of birds as my practice for equanimity. Not sort of, you know, sort of, no, I found myself, oh, there are those wretched birds in the backyard. No, Carol, equanimity, you know, just trying to, you know, reduce the sort of the ups and downs in the mind of just sort of like, you know, yes, and generate, yeah, so yes, it sort of that seems to connect with people about how the mind just goes on a roller coaster and just you know, it's sort of what you said before, Murray, about the, you know, conscious, but always there's wanting to pay attention, because attention is one of the ever-present mental factors. You know, kind of, well, where are you going to put that attention, and just sort of how it sometimes just that picture of the shamatha with the sort of the elephant and the monkey and the, you know, the sort of the monkey, the elephant running away. Oh, yes. Some days are very much like that. Others are fractionally less.
Yeah, and and gosh, over many years, you know, I've certainly had the same experience, and I think probably most people do. I find many people don't actually, almost won't own up to it, or certainly don't talk about it. But I think we all have a lot of downs and maybe the odd up, you know. But perseverance is really important here. And to be kind to ourselves, you know, that we've had, you know, countless rebirths. Who knows what our rebirth was before this, you know, but somehow we've won the winning ticket, you know, this lifetime, and we've got to try and use it as best we can. But we do have our habits from the past, you know, and you know, so that really throws us around still. So those little wins on just on a daily basis, I think are really important. As you say, you know, bring it down to something practical. The you know, the birds that you discriminate against, you know, and your husband's of course been feeding you all this information and saying, well, you know, he's educating you and saying, well, these are the native birds and this is the environment they have and this is what the harm of these other birds do, and so on like that. And so you know, then that starts to push our mind, and you know, we can see his point, obviously. So yes, like these ones, don't dislike these ones, they need to go back to wherever they came from, or you know, if we weren't Buddhist, just kill them off. And so yeah, have that equanimity. And I mean, with any of the news that we hear of these horrendous shootings, I read about one in the outback in Australia the other day, and you know, so eventually I think we can try and end up having compassion for both the perpetrator as well as the victim. And it doesn't mean that we condone the action, but I think through a deeper understanding of each of them are being pushed around by their karma. The people who end up being shot or massacred, and America certainly seems to have, a ram raiding is the flavor of the month in New Zealand at the moment. So yeah, the victims are the shopkeepers, and the criminals are the ram raiders. But if we had Buddha's insight and went back a bit, then it'd probably be totally reversed, the other way around. The shopkeepers would be, defacing or stealing other people's property, and so it's karma working itself out. So it's only because we have this very limited window and understanding then, and then the bias comes out of that, and then attraction, aversion, anger, and so on, indignation, all of these sorts of things come up. So that equanimity, yes, I think that's a kind of a necessary forerunner. We can't hope to have, love for everybody unless we first kind of have some measure of equanimity.
That's right.
I know I ran into. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go on. No,
I was going to say I ran into that with. It's not full on Tonglen, but it's essentially something I do, many times a day. Is I try and pick a person and absorb their sufferings, and then I blow out through my breath very slowly, all my happiness and virtue. And I've been playing with. Like Governor DeSantis. And in the beginning, it felt, when I took on his suffering, it really felt so uncomfortable. It felt like so oily. I don't know. It just felt uncomfortable. But after a while, it's not uncomfortable anymore. I mean, it's not like, I can see myself understanding a little bit, that he's not really under the control, that he's under the control of his afflictions, just like everybody else.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
But in the beginning, it was so difficult. It was almost a physical unbearableness.
Yeah. Definitely.
Wow.
Definitely. I was working a while ago with Putin, like that, and putting your enemies in the front when you meditate. And, Zelensky, of course, my bias, Zelensky was going behind. He was one of the friends, one of the good guys, and Putin was totally the bad guy. And I felt a bit, that sort of saying that there was a lot of energy there in the beginning. And, but now, way less, so it's interesting. So it's kind of our own experience. It kind of works, doesn't it? I mean, it probably would be different, bring it up again if they were right in our face, and there was more, maybe direct harm, to us. But nevertheless, it shows that even that works even without having that direct harm. So we already have some kind of strong energy there, and we can pacify that to a certain extent. But we've always got to bear in mind, that these are, as our teacher told us the other day, we're just really pruning the bushes. We're not digging out the roots, of the bushes. So while these methods are really helpful, we have to work on ignorance and wisdom, overcoming ignorance as well at the same time, because that's ultimately gonna end the game, kill the tree, and we don't have to then do any more pruning. But I think meanwhile, it means that if we do practice these methods, that we won't create so much negative karma. And there will be at least mundane fruits of that, relative fruits of that. And you could say, well, we are enjoying some of those from our previous work as well. So it's not like we're just coming in and we haven't done any of this, because we couldn't enjoy the circumstances that we have now without having practiced beforehand.
Oh, that's right. I'll never forget, and you would both know the indomitable Venerable Rabina Curtin, and
Yes.
she was she was in the Langri Tangpa Gompa, and I'll never forget, she was up on the chair there, and she just made the point, if you all really understood the amount of work you have done in your previous lives to get the result of being together here, being Buddhist in the center, you would just be completely blown away, she said. And the way the emphaticness and the kind of, I've never left it. And I've repeated that so many times, and now I'm repeating it to people, just because I think it's really important to remind ourselves, that we have done, like, we can't understand, we can't comprehend the amount of work we've had to do, like your numbers, Murray, like, one of you to 50,000 crew, and that's before you get to the ants, like I'm sort
Yes.
of, and the bees and the sort of,
Yes.
it's just, it is extraordinary. And the Geshe that's teaches in Brisbane, it has his own school, Geshe Tashi Seri and Kempo Rinpoche. He loves to say about, and it's really lovely to say, the kindness of our previous life. And, it mightn't be directly, but, and so he says, you have to be kind to your next life. What are you doing on your, what are you leaving on your mental continuum to, for the next life? And, when you personalize it like that, it really, it says, yeah, exactly. Right, Carolyn, you have to leave this mind stream as good and better, hopefully, than, what you picked up, and you got a precious human rebirth. So,
Yes.
yeah, but it's lovely the way he says, your previous life's been so kind. You need to be kind to your next one. Yes,
Yes, good.
yes.
Good.
Yes, Rinpoche. That's
very
sort of
good.
Yes, it is.
And
But,
that's where I think that our personal teachers are so wonderful, because we see that the faith that they have, and maybe the insight that they have, and that gives us confidence in that, because, speaking for myself, I mean, I have no recollection of past lives and so on, and I'm still trying to convince myself that there are, past and future lives in some form. It makes logical sense, but then if I look at my actions each day, do I really go about my day with that, feeling that continuity? But we can have some faith in them because of their, their confidence and their qualities that we can see, or that they appear to manifest. Of course, we can't know exactly whether they have them or not, but we can basically infer that they have these qualities. And, how wonderful, so that does inspire us, I think, because otherwise, we could be 3/4 of the way up the mountain, but, because of the fog and the mist that we're in, we can't have any feeling for, that we're actually so high, and that there's so far to go. It's where, we need them to give us our bearings, I think, and depending on our disposition too, we need that them to help us get that self-confidence that we can actually do it, that we have that Buddha potential. That yeah.
That's right. Yes, the other one that example he does, it's very hard, like is sort of like you look at the grounds and paths, and I'm not even on the first part, but we sort of questions are, but you're talking is where he's doing entering the middle way at the moment, which assumes you're sort of getting from the path of seeing this, but he says, well, it's just you have to pretend, you have to really believe, that the present state of having bodhicitta, you have it now. And, sort of really believe that. It's sort of like fake it till you make it. And that's what you need to do, this really very, like earnest sort of, yes, that's what you have to do. Believe in yourself, believe that you have it. And, sort of oh, right, okay. Take, really another example of taking the result on the path now. And sort of that's sort of believe in yourself. That's what you will achieve. And yeah.
Yes. And keep working on it while you believe it, in a way.
Yeah. That's right.
Because there's always going to be one part of the mind that says, I hope nobody finds out, I'm actually faking it. But yes, but surely it's a much better way of living anyway, isn't it? That as long as our ego doesn't, get too involved with it and, think that, oh, I really have bodhicitta and, kind of start doing all its own tricks. But in terms of self-confidence, that seems quite skillful, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so. Otherwise, it's sort of what's the use of, listening to teachings like entering the middle way, because I sure ain't on the path of, seeing, which is what they assume, where you are when you're sort of doing that, listening to that text. But it's such a beautiful sort of teaching, so you need to hear it now to try and, support the, yes, okay, I'll fake it till I make it.
Yes. I think also too that it gives us some, whether we remember all those details or not, but it gives us some confidence that there's a link from one step to the next, right up to enlightenment. And I mean, probably most of us had a basis in, well, I'm not sure about you, Lou, but from Christianity, it was almost like, well, there's me here, miserable, suffering, and then there's God there. And it's like Christianity doesn't really talk about us becoming God, but in a sense, there seemed to be this sort of great gap between here and there, even maybe some heaven state, some really pure state. And it didn't, there is obviously some methods. I'm not putting Christianity down, but there's many more. There's a lot more detail that we get in Tibetan Buddhism, really about how we can actually achieve it, and the step by step, and what happens on this level and that level. And so I think studying these texts helps us gain that confidence that, if we're able to get our, meditate better and the circumstances, that there will be a time when we actually can progress from this level to the next level, and then from there to the next level, and so on. And then finally, we're on the 10th Bodhisattva ground, and, Buddha's welcoming us. All the Buddhas are welcoming us with open arms, in a way. Yeah, it's like, the biggest party ever,
and it's all in the mind.
Yeah. And yet, it's all in the mind, and yet it's not just make-believe.
That's right.
It's dependent upon the mind. So So that's good. And I think the Dharma friends are really important there as well. Obviously, I mean, you're talking about the teacher. The teacher is really important, but also our Dharma friends are really important as well too, in helping us and encouraging us on the path, swapping notes and having discussions and maybe sometimes, finding our ideas are totally wrong, or helping, them with their ideas and so on. And so otherwise it's very lonely. I think, people who live isolated from other Dharma communities can really struggle because of that. Perhaps now with Zoom, so on, here we are in 3 different places in the world. But we can have a nice discussion and go away feeling energized, because of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Anyway, it's getting close to 12 o'clock in my world. 6 o'clock in Lou's world, and probably 10 o'clock
10 a.m. in my world.
Yeah. So I don't know, let's just finish off and dedicate in our mind that whatever benefit there's been through this, may it ripen in our own mind towards our path to enlightenment, and the idea of that being to benefit all sentient beings, to lead them out of their own ignorance, every single one of them, including our governors and leaders of other countries and leaders of our own country, and invasive species and all of those, every single one of them without exception, lead them to enlightenment because of this merit. Right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Murray. Yes.
And thank you all.
Nice. Thank
and
you,
I'm
Lou.
leaving this knowing all about how many krill there are. I'll never forget that.
Great. All right, well,
Okay.
with any luck,
Thanks.
we'll see you next week.